Welcome to Fright Fix, and in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the movie Gerald's Game from 2018, I think, 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
20, yeah. And it's actually directed by Mike Flanagan, the guy who did Haunting in Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and The Haunting of
the Netflix
something
series.
else. Yeah, I love his Netflix stuff. I think he did that vampire one recently as well, Midnight Mass.
Oh wow. Oh yeah, now that you've listed them out, I can really see the similarities between them all. I didn't realize it was the same person who'd
and he
done
cast
Gerald's
his
Game.
wife. He cast his wife in everything.
Is Carla what's her name?
No,
Oh
not
no.
her. Her mum, the one who played her mum. She's in like everything he does.
Kate Siegel.
Yeah.
That's the other part. I was going to say that. I could recognize her from other things. And I'm guessing it's all of those things that you just listed out. Wow, nepotism to the max. Just be like, yep, my wife's in it. My wife's in it.
Why not? She's pretty good. She's a good actress. Yeah.
Yeah, she is. I swear she was in oh no, it is pretty much. I'm just looking at her. What's it called? Filmography, and there is a lot of horror films. She's clearly got a type. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I think they met on one of his films and then they hit it off.
Oh right, well, yeah. So Gerald's Game by Stephen King. Got to remember that.
Have you ever read the book?
I haven't, but I know quite a lot about it. So I was going in to this film with a bit of a knowledge.
Prior to watching this, you were familiar with the.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I knew nothing about this going in.
It's one of those things where I knew the storyline before I started watching it, but I'm pretty sure I've never read the book. So in some kind of osmosis, I have received this information and could kind of draw comparisons between the two. But it makes me want to go and read it because I know that this book, Gerald's Game, was known as quite an unadaptable book because it's quite crazy and the hallucinations are weird, and Stephen King is really good at kind of flipping through timelines and looking in and out of people's, introspective ways.
Yeah.
And that lots of people thought that this is one of those things that just won't translate properly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised actually with Gerald's Game. Did you know anything about it before you watched it?
No, I'd heard the title somewhere in my life in the past, because the title sounded familiar, so I didn't know it was based on a Stephen King property. But I was, I thought, I was totally down with it. Like, when you mentioned the book being unfilmable, like when I forget the lead character's name in the Jessie, like when she starts talking with her hallucinations, like I just thought it was so well put together. Like the way it was edited was so well done. And to be honest with you, I put a lot of stock in Mike Flanagan, the director of this. Like I've just enjoyed everything he's made up until this point. And it's when he makes any of these horror things, like the Netflix shows he's made, and obviously this movie, like there's a certain polish to the stuff he does, and it just like in with previous episodes and previous reviews, occasionally I would have said like if the script, if this script was in more masterful hands or better hands with a more capable director. Like this is a guy who doesn't seem like a journeyman director. He seems like Mike Flanagan seems like a guy who really takes a bite out of the script or the story and really tries to. He's very lean with what he puts on screen, and very efficient. He's very economic with how he shoots stuff. And at no point did I don't think there was any point in this movie where I felt like any time was wasted. It's just everything you see on the screen just seems so purposeful. And I don't know
the story along.
Yeah, and I don't know if I should be giving credit to Stephen King or Flanagan. I mean, I don't know because I've not read the book, but it's just everything that's shown on camera either comes back later on, is referenced later on, or I mean, I do have one kind of critique about the story, but I can get to that later on. But But what did you think of it? Do I need to apologize to you for making you watch this, or what were your general thoughts?
No, not at all. I mean, I think I read an article that said Mike Flanagan is a real fan of Stephen King and really wanted to pay homage to the book itself. So I think, when you were thinking about whether this is true to the book or not, I think it probably is very similar in the way that it moves through the story. But because of the way that Stephen King writes, it can be fantastical. And like I said, kind of there's so much going on. It's so deep that it must be really hard to pull all of that out and make it into a a 1 hour 45 film, and keep it so succinct that you, like you say, you don't feel like anything is just buffer, which we see a lot. Like, there are a lot of horror films where things just never happen. Like, what was the one we saw recently about the nuns?
The nuns?
You know, it was like a nunnery school for exorcisms. Do you remember that film we saw?
Oh,
and it was...
I've totally forgotten what it's called. It's one I've not even uploaded just yet.
Well, anyway, that one, where they have so much fluff around the story that you just feel like a story could have been told in half an hour, but it wasn't.
Yeah. I remember the one you're talking about. Yeah.
But I didn't feel it with this. And like I said, I knew the premise of the story was that a man and his wife go to a cabin and they're secluded and they're by themselves, and they try this kind of sex game where the woman, Jessie, is handcuffed to the bed, and then Gerald, massive spoiler alert, has a heart attack and dies, and she's stuck there, and the story is about her being stuck there. But I was kind of worried going into this film that, like, what do you do once Gerald's died? Because I didn't know much about the hallucinations or anything. I kind of assumed that that's what was going to happen, because what else are you going to do? Just watch her kind of slowly panic by herself. But and his death comes really early in the film, so I was like, oh, okay,
in like the first 10 minutes, pretty much. Yeah.
So you're like, okay, there must be some like fun stuff coming up. Well, not fun, but entertaining stuff coming up for this to be a good film. And I think it was. I think you're absolutely right. Like, the hallucinations were really well done. And from what I read, the book has different characters as the hallucinations, not just Jessie and Gerald from her own mind. More. Yeah, so there's like her younger self is there. There's like a really old-timey like ancestor of hers from like a historical version of herself, and some other people. Whereas this, they've kind of really whittled it down to just Jessie. There's Jessie, who's the real person who's on the bed, and then there's Jessie, the hallucination, who is like her confidence almost. Do you think like her strength? Yeah. And then there's Gerald, who's the opposite, is trying to scare her and be her downfall and be abusive and manipulative and all the bad things that she thought Gerald was at that time, I guess.
It's that plus her own self-doubt and her own lack of confidence and her own lack of self-esteem and
I think those things work really well together. I was really interested to see like an inner monologue played out in almost, what did you think? I thought there was almost quite funny bits of it, like the way that they were interacting with each other was almost like not laugh out loud, but a bit like dark humor of some sort.
100%. Yeah, I think especially the interplay between her hallucination of herself, the confidence building one, and Gerald, like just the interplay between them two. Is that, you know how like in cartoons you see the angel and the devil on the person's shoulders? It was kind of like that, but a bit more sophisticated.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that's, and them playing off each other and almost having the real Jessie just watching them play off each other was really interesting. But you know, they deal with a lot of dark stuff in this film with Jessie's childhood trauma. And
I did not see any of that coming.
Neither did I. I think, I mean, I thought it kind of hints at it at the beginning, when they're playing the rough sex scenes and stuff, that she doesn't like it. But I think anybody wouldn't like what he was trying to do to her. Like, it was really uncomfortable to watch.
That just seemed like a very normal reaction that anybody would have. So when he was, so he'd tied her to the bed with handcuffs, and then he started living some kind of rape fantasy on her.
Without her permission.
I mean, I think don't get me wrong, some people have their kinks, and you know, maybe there might be some people that would love to be in handcuffs and love to live out that kind of fantasy or whatever.
But it's consensual between the two of them that makes
100%.
It good.
100%. And being with someone you trust, because man, I don't know about you, but like I felt like I couldn't breathe when she's like when he's died, and then she's just there tied up to the bed, and you can feel and hear the metal of the handcuffs clanking against the wood, and there's no escape because even her wrists just seemed so fragile, and I just imagined myself in that position, and I just could not breathe. and I was like, what the hell do I do? And then they show her screaming, and we're outside the house, and you can just hear her faint little voice in the middle of the woods. No one's going to hear her. And that in itself, like, one of my fears is like drowning or just being caught in like really tight spaces. And with that movie, oh my gosh, like, it's...
And that's the same kind of feeling, isn't it? Of like, and you are so right. The first thing I was doing was like, what would I do in that situation? And it makes it, because as crazy as it is plausible in a way. Like, it's a realistic thing to happen.
Definitely. Yeah.
And how scary that would be, especially when they kind of tease her with having her phone really close to her, but out of reach. Like, everything is so close but out of reach because of the way she's tied to the bed.
Yeah.
And I mean, I felt the tension so much because I knew that Gerald was going to die. I just didn't know when. It kind of came out of nowhere. But when he started grabbing his chest, I was like, oh no, this is the point where it's going to happen. And the way he like fell on her and she had to push him off, and she was like,
oh, dear.
You know, saying, oh, don't joke and things. But one thing I did not expect was when we saw the dog at the beginning, I was like, that dog's going to come back, because that's an omen for something. Oh boy, did that dog come back. I didn't really think he was going to come in and start eating the dead body of Gerald, but that interaction was so cool as well, like her trying to shoo this dog off, but also she'd been so nice to that dog and said, you know, it's just trying to survive and all this stuff. And the relationship between her and that dog was a really cool concept, I think.
It's just, as I said earlier on, like, everything was purposeful in this movie. Like, the feeding the stray dog at the beginning, like what just seems like a normal whatever. Oh, she's such a nice person. Oh, she feeds stray animals. Who would have thought that dog would have come back? Maybe it was really obvious, but you know, this rabid dog or homeless dog was going to come back and be this threat or presence. Yeah. And as you said, it may be an omen. And I couldn't help feeling that this movie, at first I was thinking every girl needs to watch this movie, like as a cautionary tale, if anything, like just so you can avoid getting yourselves in these kind of situations. But then a part of me, as I continued watching the film, I was thinking, I think everybody full stop needs to watch this movie, because I mean, I just think it's such a, I don't know. I think it's the handcuffs, because they weren't like play handcuffs.
Yeah, that was their first mistake, was that they used proper metal handcuffs for sex game. I'm like, come on.
Police officer handcuffs or whatever.
I mean, they had to for this book to even work in the slightest, but like, everybody as a warning, use plastic handcuffs.
Yeah. Or just don't get yourself in a situation. Maybe you should think of every single situation like this. Whatever situation you're in, if one of you randomly has a heart attack and dies, I use the label to get out of this. And if the answer is no, don't get yourself in that situation.
I'm just thinking of all the possibilities. Like, you can't go scuba diving with a partner, so then I suppose you could scuba dive off by yourself, but you shouldn't really.
Yeah.
What about if you went kayaking, like canoeing, and one of you dies?
Oh gosh, you just reminded me. There's this video online, and I think it may have been uploaded in the last couple of months, but it shows a paragliding instructor with like a customer, paragliders taking the customer on an experience, the customer wasn't strapped in properly. So as they literally took off, that person who's going for the experience like comes off a little bit and grabs onto the instructor, and you see the entire video until they land or whatever. But I think the guy broke his wrist or something because he was holding on for dear life, and I don't know what he ripped in his arm or whatever. But it's just this one continuous video. You see it's online. It's terrifying.
That's so scary. It's like, your fight for survival in anything is, and that's what this film is all about, isn't it? It's like, as cringy as it sounds, it's like one woman's fight to survive, not only physically but mentally get through it. She has to confront all of her demons. She has to. And what I love about the way that this film deals with trauma, and I've said this, the opposite about this in loads of films, is that they just kind of dump these really heavy subject matters onto films. And they don't really think about the implications that would have on the audience that might have gone through a similar thing, or just really fleshed out what that means to the character. It's almost like, let's hit all of our markers. Whereas in this film, and I guess the book as well, but the film, I feel like it really uses the idea of trauma in a way in which it helps the character not be a victim. It helps them, because it's her childhood self that tells her how to get out of the handcuffs. and she wouldn't have been able to know that without facing that memory of what her father did to her. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's almost her way of dealing with what she went through in a way that moves the story along and doesn't just feel like it's a plot point that they can, you know, tick the boxes with. And I really appreciated that. And I like that at the end she becomes, you know, she starts a charity to help other children who have gone through things like this, and she tells her story every time she meets them. And it's like the opposite of, she literally never said that before, you know, these events happened. And I really liked that. I liked the way that it was used in this film.
Yeah. It's I mean, I did not expect her dad to have been a creepy dad who is like borderline. I mean, you know, whatever kind of sexual abuse he was partaking in, like, I didn't see that coming. It was creepy as hell. Like when he asks her to sit on his lap when she's a kid, and then he starts doing his business behind her.
Yeah.
And but I mean, that scene alone was pretty extreme, but I'm glad they didn't shy away, like they depicted it, you know, full on in the movie. But then the scene after that, when he starts manipulating her into keeping quiet, essentially, that scene was just a masterclass. Like it was so masterfully put together, like, and his kind of manipulation is on full display, and she's falling for all of it. And it was just, they didn't skimp out on screen time, they didn't skimp out on dialogue or script. The actors were both into it and so convincing. I just can't recall the last time I'd seen manipulation shown on screen like that.
I mean, it was textbook to the point where, but it was textbook in a way that is, you kind of want to scream at the camera and say, don't believe, like, don't be sucked into. And I guess that's the way that you reach audiences, is to show them quite obviously these ways that people can manipulate you. But also it was so interesting because it was subtle at the same time. Like it wasn't like, you need to do this. He was saying the opposite. He was saying we should tell your mum what happened so that she'll say no, and then it will be her idea and not his. And it was just, like you say, masterfully put together. And I think Jessie's character, you know, she says what happened afterwards was the thing that really affected her, and that was the manipulation itself, and that's what kept her from saying something all these years, and it's been buried within her for so long.
Because when they were hinted at something happened in the bedroom that was far worse or whatever, I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to show some sort of like, is the father going to rape her or something? But in a way, he kind of mentally
abused her.
Which was probably even worse than the actual act itself or whatever. And
it was only with her going back, because she almost refused to go back into her brain to remember that memory, but her hallucinations were telling her she had to. And by her confronting that, like I said, it gave her the tools to survive, because it was her younger self that said that she needed to, very gorily, might I add, rip her hands open to kind of like, it wasn't that really, really visceral to watch. She got a piece of glass and like sliced her hands open to like, was it to get enough liquid to like slide out of the handcuff? Or was, like, I couldn't quite tell what the aim was.
I think it was, I don't know what it was, but it was something that, I don't know, maybe kind of morphed the hand in a way where it could slip out of the handcuff a bit easier, because the skin, like the skin literally came off the bone, and you could see the skeleton hand beneath it. I don't think I've ever seen anything that graphically gory and realistic on screen in my life. Like
it made my knees go weird.
Yes,
it
made everything go weird.
And we've got quite high tolerance for things like this, but that was, like you say, I also think because it wasn't a gory film, that this almost was surprisingly gory for the film that it was showing.
I mean, considering that with the movie it's all shot in one place, and it's just really, there's only two actors throughout most of it, maybe 3 or 4, like a couple of peripheral actors for 1 or 2 scenes here and there. And I think they poured all their budget into that special effect of the skin coming off the hand so that she could release herself from the handcuffs. Like, that was, I can still feel it right now. I'm literally rubbing my forearm whilst I'm talking about it. But it was the perfect moment at the perfect
it was the climax of, you know, she's desperate and we're desperate for her to get out. I was feeling it with her. The way, like, and I think Carla, is it Gugino?
Yeah,
she's in loads of horror stuff, but I thought she was brilliant in her pain. So like when she was, when she woke up and she was she had cramps and like her hands were losing all the blood, and it was like, oh, I can feel it and I can see her fear, and it had to have been a good actress to do that, otherwise we could have very easily not cared. She was really really good. One of the scenes that really got me was when we're tricked into thinking that she gets out, like quite close to the beginning. Do you remember when she smashes up the bed frame and manages to get out? And I was like, oh, this is not what I expected to happen. And then it kind of goes back and it was all a hallucination. You're like, no. Because you're kind of saying to the camera, okay, just try that, just, and they're showing you all the things that she's trying, but it isn't working, and you're like, oh no, now even I've run out of ideas. No, 100% is what I can't help feeling with this movie is if it maybe had a little bit more of a budget, and maybe if they shot it on like film rather than digital, because a lot of these modern movies are on digital, just so it had a bit more of there's something about being shot on film which gives the film a bit more integrity, realism, and just makes it a little bit more cinematic. And I just feel like this film would have benefited from that quite a bit, because I just feel like it ticked every box. And other than the visual, the aesthetics of the visual quality of the film, I think that was the only part where I feel like, this was a film that was worthy of it. It just bumped it. That's fair enough. I'd be really interested to hear what you thought of The Moonlight Man.
That I didn't see. I didn't, because up until that point I thought it was just a part of her brain just tricking her or whatever. So at the end, when that all kind of came to be, like, it turns out there's like some kind of grave digger, serial killer or whatever out there on the
who actually came into the house. She thought it was a hallucination of death.
I don't know how I felt about that. I there's a part of me that feels like that could have been deleted from the movie and it might not have made much of a difference, but then I don't know, what did you think?
I'm pretty much on the same lines as you. I mean, I have to admit, when I went to sleep that night after watching it, I was genuinely, for the first time in years, scared, because I was thinking about he really scared me. Like the idea of him, when she first sees him, he's in the corner of the room and he walks forwards and you see him in all of his glory. He honestly freaked me out so much. I don't know what it was. I honestly don't know what it was. I don't know if it hit a nerve or something, but I was so scared. I was really scared.
I had no idea.
Like, almost covering my eyes, and I haven't been like that for years with horror films, but I don't know, there was something about it. But I agree with you that I think I like the twist. Like, I like that she had this idea that he was death and that she had to give him something, and then she could almost trick death into being able to leave. And that he was waiting for her. I like that, like, death will be here next to, this evening, as Gerald tells her in his hallucinations, and a constant presence there. And I quite like that death ended up being a real person, and that she could confront him as a person who, had been part of that traumatic experience. But I think I agree with you that the ending was a bit long. Like, the bit after she had got out, they almost try and tie everything up in a neat bow. Like, she's now better, she's had a skin graft, he is a real person and he's gone to trial, and then she can go and confront him and say, you look much smaller in real life or something, and then she can start her charity and talk to people about it. I was like, I don't know if we needed all of that. Maybe like one of those things, or even if it was just newspaper clippings saying that the man was real, that would have been quite cool. She's like, oh, she didn't know, but he was actually a real person in the corner of the room. But it kind of just carried on. I feel like you read my mind, genuinely. It just feels like if we'd both written reviews on this, I think we would have largely written a lot of the same stuff. And my main criticism of the movie was that ending as well, where you took the words right in my mouth. It just tied up every loose end in a nice little bow, which isn't in itself a bad thing, but sometimes it's nice to have that bit that's open to interpretation. I think what would have probably been a better thing about the guy in the corner, the tall guy, was he real? Wasn't he real? Like, maybe leave that for the audience to decide, and give enough crumbs where for us to keep us guessing. It's
like, in Inception, when the spinning top at the end, it's that kind of like this, like, what is it? It kind of divides the audience. I think something like that, it would have been the perfect end to the movie. And but I mean, here's the thing: the film, like, it's impossible to please everyone, because with loads of movies, you get people that are like, yeah, but what happens? What happens afterwards? What happens?
Yeah, and I'm usually like that. I'm usually like, I want to know what happened next. So
loads of people do. Yeah,
that must be annoying. I'm now like, I don't want to know.
No, you're not annoying at all. But it's with this film, it does that. It gives the audience like, it answers everything. It doesn't leave anything any loose threads, and but which is great. I mean, there's not going to be a sequel. It's that story, but
it is very much done. Do you know what would have been quite cool is if the final, so she gets away. The final scene is her when she crashes the car, and she falls out of the car, and then you see lights, so you know that she'll be okay. We know she's going to be okay. Boom, done. She's fine. But then what if the next scene was like, it's in the daytime, you're zooming in on the house and it's all quiet and you can hear like the birds chirping and the grasshoppers and things, and it's very serene. And then behind like a tree or something, you can just see him like still there, and then and if that was the ending, you could be like, oh, was he real then? Because he's still there. Or is that still part of the imagination? I thought that would have been quite cool.
You know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say, like, she goes to the courtroom and she sees him, then goes, oh, you're not as tall as I remembered, or whatever. And then she wakes up and then she's still tied to the bed.
Oh, no. The film ends. I actually would have hated this film if that was the case. I would have had such a different experience. I would have said it was stupid, pointless.
Oh, dear.
No, she had to survive. She had to, after all of that. But I'd seen, this the bit at the end where he's in the courtroom and he rips off the little plastic things that are holding him to his chains. Yeah. And he's like, you're not real. You're only made of moonlight. Or whatever he says to her at the end. And then she's like, you're smaller than I remember. I have seen that clip on Instagram. Like,
oh, have you?
Countless times. And I've never known where it's from. And it's freaked me out every time because it's so random. Because it's just this, odd looking man and this woman. And then suddenly it changes into different men because she sees the face of her father and then the face of Gerald on him. Yeah. And I've always been confused, like, was that what is this film? Like, where has this come from? And then as she walked into the courtroom, I was like, oh my God, this is the film that clip is from. And I had no idea. But that, on its own is very confusing.
Well, out of context,
but also in context, the bit where he says to her, you're only made of moonlight, can't figure out what that means.
I don't know either.
He's saying, you're not real, you're only made of moonlight. If she'd said that, it would have made more sense because she didn't think he was real. And Gerald had told her that he's the Moonlight Man and he comes to take you away, kind of thing. But he said it.
But he was there in the room. So he would have made the conscious decision to go to that house, hang about in the corner and stare at a bed with a woman on it. So obviously she's real.
Yeah.
As you put it, if it was the other way around, because she may have doubted herself and may not have had all of her faculties or whatever. So it makes more sense for her to say it.
So I'm like, but I'm sure I'm just missing something about why he said it. And it was quite cool because that's the only thing he says, is it?
It's something I don't remember. I
don't think he does. So, it's quite a cool thing to say, but still it's confusing.
I agree with you. Yeah.
But he freaked me out so much.
Yeah. I think the film does a lot right. It does a lot right. I think one thing I don't know how I felt about it was it kind of, how there was mention about, because I don't know, I think it was in relation to the dog and talking about how all men in Jesse's life are like dogs or whatever. And then so it shows obviously Gerald is he's got his own issues and he's kind of abuses her father abuses her. It's just that kind of, I don't know, I mean, it just reinforces that stereotype of guys being dogs and they're all the same, because literally every negative person in this movie, including the Moonlight Man or whatever, they're and it's just kind of, we're not all like that.
You are right. It is a very, very bad image of men in this film. You are right.
Like literally 100% of the men in this 100%. Movie are.
Yeah, I think it probably wouldn't have worked if you added anyone else anyway. So like because there are so limited characters in this, they almost have to embody something very specific. Otherwise, like you say, this every moment of screen time was, apart from the end maybe, was utilized for pushing the story on. And it's almost like, you know, you don't have time to not be feeding into whatever the narrative is that they're putting together, because 100%. It's such small. But yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, you could say that the two men that found her were really nice because they saved her life.
Oh, the two faceless men, yeah. Unless they double down on it and those two guys saved her and nursed her back to health only to trap her and abuse her themselves. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that this film does have a storyline about terrible men.
100%.
That's kind of what this story is about, and it does it well, because even though they are really, really terrible, they're terrible in different ways, and that's interesting. You see Gerald, he's got this kind of front and image to him of this really nice husband who's doing all these things for his wife, and then it slowly starts to crack while he's alive with the way that he acts, and then when he's dead, you hear anecdotes about their lives and what he said in the past and her fears and the way that he kind of made everything worse. And you know, he becomes worse over time, but he's very different from her father, who was a disgusting man who was able to manipulate and carry on, you know, as if nothing had happened. And it's just and she is just trying to deal with all of that. And I think it's a really interesting story about how relationships can look one way and then be another. And it's only when we really take time, probably not as long as 3 days chained to a bed, but if we take time to figure what's going on in our heads, then it could probably save us in the future. And that's a pretty amazing story to tell.